And so the thread that kicked this conversation off just 2-3 weeks ago was basically that somebody said, this is the end game for crypto, and then a few points, and then Carl jumped in and said, I think this app chain thesis is wrong, at least 98% of it. And then obviously a lot of cosmonauts jumped on it. And here we are today to discuss this. But Carl, since you started kind of like this app chain thesis is wrong debate, maybe why don't you start with just sharing your general views on how do you see the crypto endgame as we move forward? What do you think? What is the fundamental thesis that is the endgame for crypto, in your opinion?
So I think we will have 2, maybe 3 L1s that comprise 90% of the total market cap of all L1s. And I think with extremely high conviction that Bitcoin will not be one of them. Ethereum may be one of them, although I'm not really that confident in that either. But the Bitcoin, I think it's no chance. And then the question is, what kind of lives around those 2 or 3 or 4 L1s that comprise most of the value? Maybe there are some roll-ups, maybe there are some app chains, maybe there are some side chains, maybe there are some temporary chains that come in and out. That's a little murkier and harder to reason about. But I'm generally fairly optimistic that like the vast majority of activity will happen in just a handful of places. And then to the extent you have things that settle back to the main chain, those will also exist, but I don't think there's going to be that many. I don't think there's going to be, millions of them that are settling back in any like reasonable cadence. It's kind of my gut of where this all nuts out.
So your end game is, just to summarize, 2 to 3 L1s that absorb all the traffic, basically, or most of the traffic for applications, and then those applications are built on top of these layer ones. And we can also get into it later a little bit. What do you think the best contenders are to absorb most of this traffic? But I think, Jack, you have a different opinion on that. Is that right?
I do. Yeah. I just want to, Kyle, I'm guessing your assumption here is that because individual chains offer synchronous composability, this is going to be the strongest driver towards those individual, like value accreting in those L1s. Is that your kind of thesis there?
That's part of it. I don't think it's strictly about synchronous versus asynchronous composability. I think it's a little broader than that too. I've wondered this a lot. As a general statement about all decisions, the correct way to make all decisions is to pick the right variable to optimize for, and then optimize for that one variable, doing multivariate analyses and then weighting different preferences or whatever, like with different point systems, is almost always stupid. And so the question is like, what variable are you actually optimizing for at the ecosystem level? And that is very not obvious. I've gone back and forth on this, but the thing I've kind of settled on is you want to optimize for minimizing the surface area for social coordination. If you read the original Solana essay that I wrote in May of 2021, which is called Technical Scalability Creates Social Scalability, those two statements are actually corollaries of one another. But actually, I think the more useful framing is to minimize the surface area for social coordination.
Interesting.
And my biggest problem with the app chain thesis, or actually one of my big problems with the app chain thesis, is it's just increasing complexity at kind of every layer of the stack. Wallets, indexing services, middleware providers, user experience, latency, gap, just like, and not that any of these problems are individually not tractable. Without question, every single technical problem there is tractable. But the more social friction you create, and remember, in these blockchain systems, inherently, you have different parties who are not coordinating with one another, who are building these different pieces of the stack. They have, in many cases, different motivations. They are also all over the world. They speak different languages. They're in different time zones. And making all of that collectively work together, I think, generally speaking, most core crypto developers do not appreciate the social complexity that comes from making all of those layers of the stack work together.
Awesome. Okay, cool. That is some excellent clarification there. So yeah, I guess on my side, I look at this kind of the same way that we look at the history of the internet, and I view individual chains as kind of like individual computers. And in the same way that we were never able to scale one supercomputer up to the point where it was able to handle all of global traffic, you know, if you go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s even, you'll see these visualizations of the mainframe and all the terminals. And that's kind of where we're at with the existing smart contracting platforms. And, you know, when we're talking about 2 to 3 L1s, like, I think that's kind of what Kyle's talking about too, where you'll have these individual computers that will handle most of the traffic. Now, you know, the ability to do transaction parallelization and some of these things, like, those are very difficult technical problems, but are also tractable as well and could extend the life of some of these L1s. But I think a more likely scenario is exactly what played out with the internet. You know, we figure out a common language for these different ecosystems to talk to each other, and then we can sort of horizontally scale out to as many chains that are needed as needed to support the economic activity that happens. I think this is also net positive for decentralization and kind of censorship resistance, and especially when we're talking about in a post-Tornado Cash OFAC era, these topics are once again more relevant. I think many different chains with different consensuses and different you know, makeups in terms of where their nodes are run, and, you know, some are more centralized, some are more decentralized. This is a much more likely future. And some of those problems around the quote unquote social scalability of this type of system are overblown. And we have existing technical solutions, things like DNS, and, you know, IBC, obviously a lot like Internet Protocol, to help overcome these. So that would be kind of how I'd frame my thesis around this. And what does the world look like when this is truly scaled? Users won't know which chain they're using. And in fact, with any given transaction, they may be using multiple different chains. All of that complexity will be abstracted out by wallets and other client software. And, you know, the same way there's hundreds of thousands of corporations that provide people all these different goods and services today, there will be hundreds of thousands of chains that provide these people goods and services in the future.
Yeah.